laws of Eruv Tavshilin. Eruv Tavshilin is something that applies going from Yom Tov into Shabbat. Okay, why is that? What do we need to do Eruv Tavshilin for? Eruv usually is a mechanism that permits, like Eruv for Hatzerot, to permit to carry from one place to the other. So Eruv, this type of Eruv permits, gives a leniency for cooking. Usually something you're not allowed to do, now you're allowed to do it because you did Eruv Tavshilin, which is, number one, on page 297, since it is forbidden to engage in any preparations for the day after Yom Tov, one is left with a difficulty where Yom Tov is in a Friday and needs to prepare for Shabbat. Therefore, the Chachamim instituted that one may prepare Eruv Tavshilin, which allows one to cook and prepare food on Yom Tov for Shabbat. So you can never cook on Yom Tov for a different day of the week. You only cook for Yom Tov for that day Yom Tov. You're not allowed to even cook on first day of Yom Tov for the second day of Yom Tov. You cannot. So what are you supposed to do when you have Yom Tov going into Shabbat? How am I supposed to cook food for Shabbat? I'm only allowed to cook everything before Yom Tov, and I have to wait to heat it up on Shabbat. So no, the Chachamim said there's a way to cook on Yom Tov for Shabbat purposes already. So on Yom Tov, I could sit and prepare the osavo. And Shabbat, I could go and prepare the food for Shabbat already, and then that way the next day will be ready for Shabbat. But this only applies Yom Tov going into Shabbat. Shabbat going into Yom Tov, there's no Eruv Tavshilin, because you can't cook on Shabbat for Yom Tov. No, you're not allowed to cook on Shabbat for anything. You can't even cook on Shabbat for the sake of Shabbat. So therefore, essentially, the Eruv Tavshilin is a food that has been prepared before Yom Tov and set aside for Shabbat. This act serves to permit the completion of food preparation for Shabbat and Yom Tov. So basically, you start preparing for Shabbat before Yom Tov. That allows you to continue to prepare on Yom Tov for Shabbat. Number two, if one has an Eruv Tavshilin, all melachot related to food preparation that are normally permitted for Yom Tov may be performed in order to prepare for Shabbat. Okay. 3, preparation does not involve melacha, such as tidying up a room, is permitted even when the benefit is unrelated to food consumption. Okay. 5, if the first day Yom Tov is a Friday, it is prohibited to prepare for Shabbat, even if you made a Eruv Tavshilin. The Eruv Tavshilin permits one, however, to cook on Friday for Shabbat. Right? So what happens is, when you do a Eruv Tavshilin, does that mean you can cook on any day Yom Tov? No. You gotta only cook on the second day Yom Tov, the day before the Shabbat. Right? So if it's Thursday's the first day, Friday's the second day Yom Tov, you're only allowed to cook on Friday for Shabbat. You can't cook on Thursday for Shabbat. So you gotta wait till the second day, because that's considered right before Shabbat. Okay. Number 6, even though a person did Eruv Tavshilin, permits to cook on Yom Tov for Shabbat, one should try to finish all his cooking for Shabbat as close to midday as possible, so that way the food theoretically could be used for Yom Tov. However, if you don't have enough time, you could continue to cook for Shabbat until Shkia. So let's say it's Friday, and I'm cooking for Shabbat. A person should preferably do all the cooking on Yom Tov in the morning, not in the afternoon, because that way there's another leniency that I cooked in the morning, and technically I could have ate this food on Yom Tov itself. So therefore, that's preferable. 7, to perform Eruv Tavshilin, you take a cooked item and you took a baked item in your right hand. So usually we take an egg and a bread, and we say the following. You say a bracha with the following text. Say Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech Haolam Asher Kiddushanu Mitzvotav V'Tzivanu Al Mitzvat Eruv. Okay, He commanded us for the mitzvah of Eruv. If he did Eruvah, you're saying in the Aramaic, with this Eruv, with this Eruv, let it be permitted for us to bake, cook, insulate, make preparations, let luke sharga, light candles, lemeba kol tzarchana, and do all our needs on Yom Tov for Shabbat. Yom Tov the Shabbat. And the rabbi, if the rabbi is doing the Eruv for the whole city, he should say, Lana l'chol bnei Yisrael shabeir azot, for us and all the Jews in this city. So you have to understand what you're saying. So you got to read the translation over here, and you got to know what you're saying with this Eruv. Number 9, preferably one's wife should be next to him when he makes the Eruv, so she could hear the bracha and say Amen, since usually she's the person who makes the Shabbat preparations. 10, one who omitted the text of the bracha can say at any time before Yom Tov while holding the Eruv Tavshilin. Let's say I didn't have an egg and a bread. I only had a cooked item. The Eruv Tavshilin is valid. If one used only a baked item, so then the Eruv Tavshilin is invalid. And therefore, you can only bake when preparing for Shabbat. Why do we have a baked and a cooked item? Because we want to show that we started each type of process before Yom Tov. I started baking. Look, see, this is a baked item. I started preparing cooked food. Here's the cooked food. So therefore, that's why you got to have a cooked and a baked. But if you only have cooked, then you're fine. You could still bake on Yom Tov. But if you only have baked, then you can only bake. You can't cook in a pot on Yom Tov for Shabbat. Okay. 12. One who does not intend to bake for Shabbat may use only a cooked item. Let's say I don't want to make bread on Yom Tov for Shabbat. I don't need bread. I have bread. I only want to cook on Yom Tov for Shabbat. So then you're right. So it's enough to have just an egg for Eruv Tavshilin. Technically, you don't need the bread also. What's the food? 13. The cooked item should be a food that is normally accompanies a bread meal. It must be at least the size of kazayit. Okay. 14. The perishable food should be refrigerated so it doesn't spoil. We're going to learn soon the Eruv cannot be perished. It cannot be that it perished. It has to be that it's still intact. And also it has to be that nobody ate it. You can't eat the Eruv until Shabbat because you got to wait till, you got to keep this thing around until Shabbat comes. And then the minhag is to eat it Sudah Shlishit. Okay. 15. Preferably the foods for the Eruv Tavshilin should be cooked and baked specifically for the Eruv Tavshilin. Therefore, a can of tuna or store-bought bread should not be used. However, one who does not have homemade foods can certainly use store-bought foods to fulfill his obligation of making Eruv Tavshilin. 16. The baked item should be either bread or matzah, preferably a whole one, the size of a betzah. If there's no other bread or matzah available, you can use cake or type of pastry that's mislanot. 17. One may use frozen bread for his or a frozen food for his Eruv Tavshilin, preferably not. 18. The Eruv Tavshilin must be stored in a safe place. It has to remain intact till Shabbat. 19. If one is in the middle of cooking and you realize your Eruv Tavshilin is gone. A guy told me, my kids ate the Eruv Tavshilin, they didn't realize. Or they lost it, we don't know where it is. So he's already in the middle of cooking, what does he do? He may finish preparing the food he was making, but he cannot start cooking another food. Whatever you started, you finished, you can't make another one. If someone already finished cooking the Yom Tov meal and finished and realized the Eruv Tavshilin is lost, he may set aside the food he just finished for cooking for Shabbat and then cook new food for Yom Tov. However, if it's not possible, you can rely on the Eruv Tavshilin that the rabbi made in the city. What happens is that a lot of times people forget to make Eruv Tavshilin. So what do? They're stuck. They can't cook for Shabbat on Yom Tov. So many times the rabbi will, before Yom Tov, will make Eruv Tavshilin for himself and have the whole city in mind. And you will see that does work, and you could rely on it in extenuating circumstances. Baruch Olam. Amen. Amen.